Good morning. Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel. We are at the top of Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, second line, middle of the line, Amar of Yehuda. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. Uh, Yesterday, we were continuing the listing of birds and indicating whether they are kosher and certain mnemonics that will help us remember. And so we continue with that now. So Amar of Yehuda Shekitna, when it comes to the Shekitna bird, Ariche Shake Visumke Sharia, that if it has a long legs and it's red, well, then it's permitted because there are a couple different kinds of Shekitna birds. The simanech and the symbol or the indication, the mnemonic for how you'll know that that's the one that's kosher, murzima. Don't forget about the murzima. What is murzima? Third line in Rashi, murzima shem oaf. It's the name of another bird. Shahaya muchsak lahem b'tohar, that we know for 100% is a kosher bird. Vishokav aruchin, and it also has long legs. The gufo edom, and it has a red body. So that is type number one. Gutse visum keasire. If it's got shorter legs and its red body, visimanech nanus. I'm sorry, asire. So then it's going to be prohibited. If it's so as a result, if it has short legs and it's red, it's going to be prohibited. So the difference is whether it has long legs or short legs. And so v'simanech, and how do you remember? The mnemonic is nanus. When it comes to a kohen who is a dwarf, pasul, that is, they are not allowed to serve. That is considered a mum, as Rashi tells us. Nanus pasul b'mume kohanim b'choros. In Masechet Bechoros, we'll see that that is a mum that a kohen can have. Arike shake, if it's got long legs, viroke, and it's a yellowish green, asiri, then it's going to be prohibited. V'simanech, and how do you remember that? Well, you use the reminder that we had a rule earlier in the Masechet. Yerukin, if they're green slash yellow, so then psulin, then they are invalid. What is that referring to? Rashi reminds us. Gabi nechmaru. If an animal got burned somewhat, nichmaru meyaha, where its internal organs got burned. And so, how do you determine whether there was a negative impact that is causing those the bird to become a treifa? So Tanan Leibim Masnisim, we learned earlier in a Mishnah on Nun Vav Amud Aleph that if the insides turn green, so then that's an indication that the fire burned those inner organs if the organs are supposed to be red, and so as a result that will be that animal will be a treifa. And so by remembering that rule, we'll also remember that if you come up to if you come across a shekitna that has long legs and a yellow body, that's going to a yellow green body, so that's going to also be non-kosher. Amar Rav Yehuda, another statement of Rav Yehuda. Shalach zehashola dagim min hayam. The shalach bird, and that's one of the birds that are listed in Vayikra Perek Yud Aleph, and it's listed in Pasuk Yud Zayin. So that bird is a bird that draws fish from the sea, as Rashi tells us. Zehashola dagim min hayam. Third line down, fourth line down now in the narrow lines of Rashi at the top of Samach Gimel and Aleph. Inhu havu b'kiyi bay b'hu orev hamayim. We actually know what this bird is. It's referred to as the orev hamayim, what we refer to today as a cormorant. At least that's my understanding. And so that is. That is the kind of bird that we're talking about, and so it dives into the water and it gets fish out of the sea. Duchifas. The next bird is the duchifas bird. Shahodu kafut. It's got a beautiful bound piece to it, and Rashi tells us what does that mean. Hodu shahodu kafut. Next Rashi. Carvelato. Its crown, its crest. Ava is thick. Vidoma kamisha kafula, and it looks like it's something that's folded, l'toch harosh, into the head, the kafuta and sham, and it's bound there. And so as a result, here they suggest that it's the hupa with a nice head feathering that can either stand up or be lay flat on its head. Behu of gadol ketarnagol, and it's a large bird like a rooster. But koran lo poon shalbaya, and so that's the name in Old French. And so let's go back into the Gemara. Tanya Nami Hachi. There's a brisa that actually supports what Rav Yehuda said. Duchiva shahodu kafut. That again, the duchivas is the one that has the beautiful thing on its head that's bound to its head. V'zeu shehevi shamir lebeis hamikdash. And you know what? This is the bird that brought the shamir to the Beit Hamikdash. There's basically a Gemara in Maseches Gittin that talks about how when Shlomo HaMelech was building the Beis HaMikdash, he needed the shamir because the shamir was going to break the stones and create the right proper sizes. And so, because you're not allowed to cut the stones with a metal implement, and so that was the bird that was watching over the particular worm that was going to do the cutting. Rabbi Yochanan ki hava chazi shalach amar. When Rabbi Yochanan would see such a shalach, he would say mishpatecha tahom rabbah, that your judgment goes into the deep. Ki hava chazi namala, and when Rabbi Yochanan saw an ant, amar tzidkaska kaharekel, that your righteousness is like a mighty mountain. So Rashi explains what are these referring to, and offers us two different explanations. So tzidkaska kahar rekel, the Rashis are out of order, but we'll first do the Rashi tzidkaska kahar rekel. Da'afilu nimala, that even an ant, islay chayusa kegadola, that it somehow it has its own sustenance, that it gets its own sustenance just like larger animals, meaning Hashem is concerned about the sustenance of every single animal. Umishpatecha af b'tahom rabbah, and your judgments are even in the deep. Shizmanata shalach lishpot, that Hashem sends this judgment, v'lasos dekamascha, and takes the vengeance, b'degas hayam, on the fish of the sea, lahamit hamizuminan lamut, that in order to kill those fish that are deserving of death, so then Hashem sends the shalach, and that shalach imposes God's judgment on the deep. Lashon Mori. That's how my teachers taught it. Lishna Achrina. However, you can read these in a different way. Linamala hu omer tzidkasa karekel. That when it comes to the ant, where we say that it's your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Shemin mizumanin la below torech. That the ant rarely has to work hard for their sustenance. V'im mi she'ata nishpat ata danu ad tahom. Whereas tahom rabbah. But when when they have other times, people are judged where they have to do a lot of work. Kagon shalach shetorech lebakesham mizonosav, that they have to go into the deep of the water in order to get their food. So either this is highlighting different efforts that are required of people and of things in order to get their food, or it's highlighting the fact that Hashem, can execute God's judgment wherever God wants. So Amar Amemar. So back into the Gemara, and Amemar gives us more birds. Lakani uvatne sharyan. The Lakani bird and the Batne bird, they are both permitted. However, the birds that are very similarly named, Shakna'e, Uvatna'e, those birds, Makom Shenagu le'echol ochlin, in places where they are accustomed to eat them, they get eaten. Makom Shenagu shelo le'echol ein ochlin. But in the places where they're not accustomed to eat it, you don't eat it. Atu b'minhaga, Talia Milsa, 1 second. Why should the custom matter? Meaning, if somebody from one place goes to the other place, does that mean that they can't eat it? And moreover, if it's just a custom, that's not a basis to say something's kosher or not kosher. In actually, yes, it is. Lo kasha haba asra deshchichi paris va'ozniyah. That when we say that you cannot eat it, that's in a place where the paris and the ozniya are common. And we'll see in Rashi why that would affect anything. And haba asra delo shchichi paris va'ozniyah. And the other, and when you can eat them, it's in a place where the paris and the ozniya are not common, as Rashi tells us. The shchiche. This is the Rashi from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi. It's 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, about 24, 25 lines down. The shchiche sheri'inum shehuchsaku sham paris va'ozniyah. That when, if there's a place where we see the paris and the ozniyah there, asire, then these other birds are prohibited. Dahani nami b'chad siman asu. These also have only one sign of being a kosher bird. The Shema miminamhein. And so as a result, maybe they are from the same category of birds as the Paris and the Ozniyah. But Asra de but in a place where you're not worried about Paris Ozniya, where you don't see the Paris and the Ozniya there, Sharu, then it's permitted. Well, then they are not likely to this. The birds that are the Shakna'e and the Batna'e birds are not likely to be from the Peres and Oznia categories because those categories are not in places that are that have real that are well settled. And so that's Rashi's explanation. Now, Tosos asks a question. Take a look at the top Tosos Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Perish HaKontras, de ba'asra de shchichi chayshina mishum de damu leperes v'ozniyah shema minamhu. That we're worried that because of the apparent appearance of these, that maybe they are from the same min. They're actually part of the Peres and Ozniyah family. The kasha, but that's very difficult. De'im kain, if it were true that they were really from that family, well then b'kol duchta lisru, they should be usher everywhere. Elanira, so Tosos then offers an alternative explanation that clarifies that actually we're not talking about that. We're actually worried about this actually being part of the Peres and Ozniah family. Rather, Elanira Lefarish, rather the explanation is the following. They are definitely different birds and not from the same category, Haim. Ella ba'asra deshchichi shinan mishum didamo leparis va'ozniya. No, the problem is that if in a place where you can find the Paris and Ozniya, we're worried that you might think that a Paris or Ozniya is this Shakna'ai and the Shakna'ai and the Batna'ai bird, and therefore you'll eat it when you're actually eating a Paris and Ozniyah, umichlafa behem, and you'll switch them out. Abal ba'asra delo shchichi leka lemikosh lemidi v'sharu. But when you don't have those other birds that look a little like them around, well, then you don't have to worry about any kind of confusion. And so as a result, that's why in places where the custom is to eat them, you can eat them, and the places where the custom is not to eat them, because the Paris and Ozniyah are present there, and we're worried that you might think that Paris and Ozniyah is one of these kosher birds, we say don't eat them. All right, so that's that. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Kue v'kakue asire. The kue bird and the kakue bird are prohibited. Kaku asa sharia, but the kaku asa is permitted. But ma'arava, but in Israel, malka ilava, they actually give malchus for eating the kaku asa. The karula tachvasa, and they call it the tachvasa. So all right, so again, more about these various birds and whether or not they are permitted or prohibited. So now the Gemara quotes relevant brisa that details one of the non-kosher birds mentioned in the Torah, and we'll see that there's actually also a sheretz that is of a similar name, and we'll address those two items. So Tanu Rabbanon Tinshemes Bos Sheba'ofa, that the Tinshemes is the Bos bird of the Bos bird. Ata Omer Bos Sheba'ofos. 1 second, how do you know that it's the Bos of the birds? Oh, Enu Ella Bos Shebashratzim. There's also a sheretz that's called Bos. So maybe it's referring to the crawling creature that's a Bos. So Amarta, 1 second, Sayul Madmi Yud Gimel Midah Torah and addresses ban. Well, you can use one of the 13 methods of deriving rules that the Torah is derived from, that we read every day before we say Psukei de Zimra. Davar halamei me'inyano, that we learn something from its context. Bameh hakasav medaber, what is the pasuk in Vayikra? This is Parak Vayikra, Parak Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Chet is the one that mentions the Tinshemes. And so what is it talking about in the context there? Ba'ofos, it's talking about birds. Afkan ba'ofos. So as a result, the reference to the Tinshemes must be to a bird, because the entire passage from Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Yud Gimel through Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Yud Tet is all talking about birds. And Tanya Nami Gabi Shratzim Kahai Gavna. We have another brisa that says basically the same thing with respect to the sheretz. When it comes to Tinshames, as opposed to Tinshemes, Tinshames Bos Shebaratzim. That's the bos of the bugs. Ata Omer Bos Shebaratzim. You're telling me that when this refers to it, this is Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Lamed, which is in a discussion of the different kinds of creepy crawly creatures that are not kosher. O Eino Ella Bos Sheba'ofos. Or maybe it is the bos of the ophos. How do I know that it's actually referring to the creepy crawly creature? So Amarta, again, we can use one of the 13 principles. Learn it from the context. But what's the pasuk talking about? Bishratzim. Avkan Bishratzim. Psukim, Kaftet through Lamed Chet are all talking about bugs and creepy crawly creatures, and so as a result, this pasuk too, which is in that context, is talking about that as well. And so, Amar Abaye, Bos Sheba'ofos Kipof. Well, what do we call the Bos bird today? That's called a Kipof. Bos, or at the time of the Gemara, Bos Shebashratzim Korpadai, and that's what they call the Bos of the bugs. So, Amar of Yehuda. So now, Rav Yehuda, additional non-kosher birds mentioned in the Torah are identified by Rav Yehuda. By Rama Rav Yehuda, Kaas, the Kaas bird that's listed in Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Yud Chet, Zohakuk, that is the bird that we refer to as the cook. Racham, the Racham bird, Zeh Shirakrak, that's the Shirakrak bird. So Rabbi Yochanan, Lama Nikro Shemo Racham, why was it called Racham? Kevan Sheba Racham Ba'u Rachamim La'olam. It was called Racham because when it comes, then mercy comes to the world. As Rashi tells, Rachamim Matar, it's referring to the rain. Whenever that creature would come, that would indicate that the beginning of the rainy season is upon us, and it would hopefully bring rain as well. Amar Rabivi Bar Abaye, Rabivi says the following: Hud v'hud Yosef Amidi. The ovid shirakrak, it sits on something, amidi meaning something, and then it will yell out and it will do a shirakrak sound. So ugamiri, and we have a tradition, D'i Yosef Ara, if it doesn't sit on something else, but it sits on the ground directly, the sharik, and it coos. So asa Mashiach, that's going to cause Mashiach to come. Shneamar. Eshrika lahem ba'akabtseim. I'm going to eshrika, similar to sharik. I'm going to call out and shriek and whistle for them and gather them. And that's referring to the coming of the Mashiach and the ingathering of the exiles. May it come soon in our days. Amar le Rav Ada bar Shimi, Lamar bar Rav Idai, Faha hahu de Yosef be Krava v'sharak. But 1 second, we know that there was a Racham that was sitting on a Beikrava, either it's a field of cabbage patch or it's a plowed field, the sharak, and it shrieked, and yet v'asa galal v'afsake lemoche, and out of and the stone came and it broke its skull. So I thought you said that if it called out, if it did the sharak rock when it was sitting on the ground, that the Mashiach was going to come. So Amar le hahu bayada. That hava, that bird was a bayada. And Rashi explains what is bayada. Kamo bada. It's a liar, badai, that says lies. V'shakran, and a false and is a liar. Lefikach laka, and that's why it got punished essentially. That a rock came and killed it. In fact, the prior Rashi says galala when it comes to the stone. So Eben galal min hamarom, the stone came down from the heavens, and so that is the story there. So you have to be careful. Hopefully the next time we see a racham in a on the ground shrieking, it will be actually the harbinger of the Mashiach. All right, so Tana Rabbanan. So another brisa. Again, two brises actually we'll have right now in a row about the orev and the nates. Again, other birds that are listed in Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph as non-kosher birds. So the orev is listed in Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Tesvav, and it says the following: Orev. It calls it an orev. So Ze orev, that's coming to include the orev itself. As kol orev, every orev, meaning the pasuk doesn't just say orev; it says kol orev lemino. So why does it say kol orev? So lahavi orev hamaki, that comes to include the orev of the deep. Lemino. Why does it say lemino? Lahavi orev haba barasha yonim. It comes to include the orev that comes with the heads of pigeons, and we'll figure out what that means in a moment. But again, we'll call it. Its name is essentially orev haba barasha yonim. So Amar Mar, Orev Ze Orev, Atu Kaman Koi. 1 second. How does that actually help us? Meaning, if you're supposed to say that the Orev is the Orev, of course it's the Orev. But how do I know what the Orev is unless it's right here in front of us? Ela Ema Orev Ze Orev Ukama. No, what it should say is that the Orev is the Orev that is black. So as a result, now we know an indication of whether a bird is an orev, is it black? So v'chein hu omer, and that's what they say. The pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Parakeh, pasuk Yud Aleph, kavutzosav taltalim shchorot ka'orev, that its locks are curled black as an orev, and so as a result, that's an indication that helps us identify the nature of this bird. Ha'amaki, the deep one, chivra, that one is white. V'chein hu omer, umar ehu amok min ha'or, that when it comes to a white, why is it called deep? Just because it's white. So the white it's called white deep because the appearance of a white saras appears deeper than the other than the red skin that is around it, and so that's why we'll know that, and that's how you can know that a particular bird is the orev ha'amaki. So kamare chama ha'amuka minatzel, and it's like and the Gemara in just explaining what it means that the Torah, when the Torah says in Vayikra Parak Yud Gimel, a couple different places, Pasuk Gimel, and elsewhere. So it says, what does it mean? It's kamara chama ha'amuka minatzel, that just like the sun, when the sun is shining. For example, if you look on the sidewalk and you look at the sun and a shade, and you ask yourself which looks closer, the place where it's shady or the place where it's sunny, the place where it's sunny is going to look deeper and further away from you than the place where it's shady. V'orev haba b'rasha yonim. What about this orev haba b'rasha yonim? What is it? What's the connection to the pigeons? So to the yonim, Amar of Papa, lo tema de asi b'reisha yona. Don't say that it means that it's coming before the pigeons, that the rosh means that it's sort of the leader, ela de dame reshe lidiyona. Now, the meaning is that the orev has a head that looks like a pigeon, and that's how you're supposed to distinguish this particular orev. And that orev is going to be included in the non-kosher birds, notwithstanding the fact that it has a head that's like a pigeon, and pigeons are kosher. So Tana Rabbanan, another again brisa that details one of the birds that are listed in the non-kosher list. Hanates. What about the nates? Zehanates. Limineu lahavi esbar chirya. And it says limineu in the pasuk according to its kind, in order to tell you that the bar chirya is also going to be prohibited. My bar chirya, what does bar chirya come to teach us? Amar Abaye, shurinka, it's the shurinka. So Amarav, meaning what kind of bird is the bar chirya? And Abaye says it's the shurinka. So Amar of Yehuda, hachasida, what's the chasida? Zo daya levana, that is a white daya. Lama nikrash ma chasida, why is it called a chasida? So, she'osa chasidut im chavroseha, because it provides kindness to its to its fellow birds. So, specifically, Rashi here notes chasidut mechalekes mizonoseha. It divides its food. It shares its food. And the Chedushei Arim is said to have asked the question, why then is it not a kosher bird if it's such a nice bird that it actually displays qualities that we might want to emulate? And the Chedushei Arim explains that actually this bird is does not share with other species of birds. It's only with its own species. And so as a result, that kind of exclusivity where you're only going to share with people who are like you is not the kind of quality that we want to have. We want to be able to share even with people who are not like us. Ha'anafa, what's the anafa bird that is listed in that same pasuk in Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Tet is where the chasidah is listed. The anafa, zo daya ragzanit. That is the dayana that gets angry. Lama nikra shma anafa. Why is it called anafa? Shema anefet im chavroseha, because it gets angry again with its other birds. Amar of Chanan bar Rav Chisda, Amar of Chisda, Amar of Chanan brei de Rabba, Amar Rav. So it was all said in the name of Rav. Esrim va'arba ofos tamein hain. That there are 24 non-kosher birds. Now, we've been saying that for a while, but we haven't actually proven it. And so now we're going to go through it. So Amar le Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda, le Rav Chisda. So tehecha, how do you know? If you're going to look at in Sefer Vayikra, how many birds are listed there? Esrim havu. There are only 20 birds listed there. The Mishnah Torah, if you look in the repetition of the Torah, or the secondary Torah, or what's referred to as Deuteronomy, is the more traditional translation of it, but what we call Dvarim. So Esrim v'chad havu. There are 21. So look, 20 or 21, I can understand how you could get to, but how did you get to 24? V'chid tema da'ah. Diksiva b'Vayikra v'lo ksiva b'Mishnah Torah. So fine, you'll tell me that there's one that's written in Vayikra that isn't written in Dvarim, and so that brings us to 22. Shadya alayhu. So that needs to be added to the 21 in Dvarim. Akasi esrim u'train havi. That still brings you only to 22, not 24. So Amrlei, Haki Amravua de Imach Mishmei de Rav. This is what your mother's father said in the name of Rav. Again, explaining how it was that Rav came to the 24 list. Limina. Well, it says Limina in connection with the ayah. Limina, it says in connection with the anafa. Limino, it says in connection with the orev. Limineu, it says in connection with the nates. So we have four additions. Hare kan arba. That's four more birds. And so that's how we get to 24. One second, that doesn't get you to 24. 4 plus 22, ihachi esrin v'shishavu. That comes to 26. So Amar Abaye, da'a v'ra achas he. That the da'a and the ra birds are one kind of bird. Because if you tell me that they're two different kinds of birds, I'll make the following argument to me as we turn to Samach Gimel Amabet. Michti, Mishneh Sora, Le'osufe, Huda Asa. The Torah comes to, in the Mishnah Torah, is coming only to amplify and not to teach, and not to reduce. And so as a result, it needs to be more inclusive. So Maishna Hacha Diksiv Da. Well, then why in Vayikra does it call it say that there's a Da? Maishna Hacha Diksiv Ra Beloksiv Da. But in Dvarim it doesn't write the da, and it just writes ra'ah, which are very similar. The resh and the dalet are very similar letters. So why does it say the ra'ah and not the da'ah? Ela shmamina min ra'ah v'da achasi. It's teaching that actually those are the same birds. Va'akati esrim v'chamsha havu. All right, that gets you down to 25, but that's not 24. So Amar Abaye says again, explaining that he needs to come up with a second one, and so now he's going to say the same thing. Kashem shara v'da achasi, kach aya v'daya achasi. Just as the ra and the da are one bird, so too are the aya and the daya one bird. De'i salkadaita tarti, because if you tell me that they are two different kinds of birds, michti. Let's take a look. Mishneh Sorelo Sufehu Asa, when it comes to Devarim, that's going to tell us something new and not going to reduce from what we had before. So Maishna Hacha Diksiv Limina Aya, but when it comes to the Aya in Vayikra, it says Limina. Umaishna Hasam da Diksiv Limina Adaya. But when it comes to the Dvarim, it uses the word Limina for Daya. So Elashmamina, Aya Vidaya, Achasi. So that's teaching us that the Aya and the Daya are really one bird. So Fachima Achar Aya Vidaya Achasi. But one second, if they are really one bird, Lamale Lemichtav Aya Vidaya. Why write both of them? Because essentially in both why do you need to have both of them? Because after all, in Dvarim, it's specifically true that I think both of them are written there. Kedetanya, no, it's like the Brisa. Rabbi Omer Ekra Ani Aya Daya Lama Namru. Rabbi says, look, why not just have the pasuk say Aya? Why does it also say Daya? So it doesn't let a litigant come and argue about this. So Labal Din, Rashi tells us, Lamisha Rotza Lichlok Alayach V'ladun Lahakshira. So that if you say that if you properly say that it's not kosher, somebody else might come and say that it's actually a kosher bird. Because you'll say this is an ayah bird, and he'll say, "Oh well, I'm not eating an ayah bird. I'm eating a daya bird." So ata kore daya v'hu kore ayah, and what you call daya, he calls ayah. So, meaning the other way around. If you say that the daya bird, this is the daya bird, he'll tell you that it's the ayah bird. If we had only written one of those words. So Lakach Kasav b'Mishnah Torah, that's why it says V'hara'av es ha'aya v'es ha'daya lamina. So as a result, it mentions both the ayah and the daya in order to eliminate any kind of confusion, so that actually they are both clearly the same bird, even though there's and we'll mention them both so that there's no question that they are prohibited, whatever name you give it. It's sort of like a rose would a rose by any other name smell as sweet? Would a rose would a ayah bird, if it was called daya bird, suddenly become kosher? And the answer is no. It's still the same bird. Okay, so Meisvei, a question. So, sorry for not scrolling here. My apologies. Here we go. Lama Nishnu, why were they repeated? this is a brisa that is challenging Rav's statement that in fact, let's take a look at Rashi because Rashi helps us understand the challenge. Meisvei, this is Rashi from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi. It's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 22, 23 lines down in Rashi. Meisvei, L'Rav, according to Rav de Amr La'el, who said above, Kaf Daled Ophos Tamei and Hain, that there are 24 kinds of non-kosher birds. V'kachashiv da'a v'ra b'chad v'aya v'daya b'chad. And we said that the da'a and the ra'a are one bird, and the aya and the daya are one bird, and that's how we got from 26 back down to 24. So according to that viewpoint, this brisa seems to be a problem. Lama Nishnu, why were the kosher and non-kosher creatures repeated in Sefer Dvarim? Bevehema mibnei hashesua. When it came to the animals, it's because of the shesua, meaning that because the shesua is not mentioned in Vayikra, it needed to be mentioned in Dvarim to tell us that it's not a kosher animal. Uba ophos. And when it comes to the birds, mimnei hara'ah, it's to tell us about the ra'ah, which again is a specific kind of bird that is, maybe it's to tell us that it's an added bird. So my lab de behema dahasam laosufe, ovos nami laosufe. So when it came to the animals, it was adding another animal that's not kosher. And now here, when it's adding another ophot, it's also adding another animal that's not kosher. So as a result, we see that from this, the ra'ah is different from the da'ah, because the da'ah is already mentioned in Dvarim. So the fact that we're mentioning the ra and the da shows that, in fact, that it shows that those are two different birds, contrary to, and therefore, there are 25 birds that are actually non-kosher. So, no, that's not actually the right read of this brisa. Hasam la osufe. You're absolutely right. Then when it comes to the animals, it's adding the shesua as a non-kosher animal. But when it comes to the birds, hacha leferushe. But when it comes to the birds, it's just going to clarify. The addition is coming for clarification. So, upligi de Rabbi Abahu, and Rav argues with Rabbi Abahu, because we're going to see that Rabbi Abahu has a different count, and that different count is going to lead to a different number. So to Amar Rabbi Abahu, Ra'a zo aya, that the Ra and the aya are the same bird. Now again, remember that we had before that it was the da and the Ra'a that are the same, and the aya and the daya that are the same. And now we're saying that the ra and the aya are the same. And so if we still have the da and the ra and the being the same, and the aya and the daya being the same, well, now all four birds are the same bird, and we're going to see that that's exactly what Rabbi Abahu says. Ra zel aya lama nikra shma ra. Why was it also called the ra? Shiroa biyoter, because it sees really well. V'chein hu omer, and that's what people say. This is a pasuk in Eov. Parak Kafchet, Pasuk Zayin, Nasiv lo yida'o, the path, ayat, the path was not known by the ayat, v'lo shezafatu ein ra'aya, and it was not discovered by the eye of the ayah, highlighting that the ayah's eye is very good. So Tana, and it was taught in a brisa, Omedes bivael, the roa nevela be'eretz Yisrael. Then it comes to the ayah, it could stand in Babel and see a nevela, a dead animal that it would want to take and attack and eat, rather, in Eretz Yisrael. Midira hainu aya. Now, since the ra is the aya, miklal the da lav hainu ra. Well, then that would suggest that the da and the ra that we had said are the same are not the same. But michdi mishnah sorah la'osufi huda asa. As we said earlier, Dvarim is coming to include more. Maishna hacha deksiv da, maishna hasam deloksiv ra, deloksiv da, excuse me. Elalav shmamina da v'ra v'aya achas. Hey, all three of them are the same. Umidara haina aya. And when we said that the ra is the aya, miklal the daya lav hainu aya, that maybe it means that as the implication is that the daya is not the same as the aya. And maishna hasab diksiv liminehu aya. But 1 second, why in Vayikra does it say liminehu with respect to the aya? Umaishna hacha deloksiv liminehu aya ela adaya. But it says in Dvarim, it says it about the daya and not the aya. So again, it must be ela shmamina da v'ra daya v'aya achasi. All four birds are one bird, and so as a result, because we've now reduced the birds by one, Rabbi Abahu would say that there are actually only 23 non-kosher birds that are listed in the Torah, because the ayah and the daya and the ra and the da are all one bird. And so that would limit us to only 23. Okay, Tanya. So we have now the Gemara quotes a brisa that relates to the ayah and the multitude of birds that are in that category. So Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Meya Ophos Tmein Yesh B'Mizrach. There are 100 kinds of non-kosher birds in the east. The Kulan min ayahain, but they're all part of the ayah family, and so as a result, they don't really count towards the 23. They are just part of the ayah family. And we have a similar teaching. Tane Avimi Braid de Rabbi Yabahu, Shva Meos Mine Dagenhain. There are 700 kinds of fish, and Rashi tells us Mine Dagim. This is from the bottom of Rashi on Samach Gimel Lamed Bet. It's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19 or 20 lines up, Mine Dagim, Tameim. It's telling us that these are the number of non-kosher fish. Ushmona meos minichagavim, and there are 800 kinds of grasshoppers. And Tosos here suggests that it's talking about the non-kosher grasshoppers because otherwise, what's the use of it? Meaning, knowing how many kosher animals without having the qualities associated with them doesn't really help. But if you know how many non-kosher animals are and you know the identity of them, well, then if you find something new, well, then you know by definition it's kosher. But ula ophos ein mispar. And for when it comes to birds, they are innumerable. And the implication, given the fact that the fish and the grasshoppers were both talking about the non-kosher variety, so presumably the non-kosher variety of birds are also innumerable. But 1 second, Ophos Esrin va'arba havu. Rav told us that there are 24 kinds of non-kosher birds. So what does it mean? Ella la'ophos tahorim ein mispar. No, the point is that for the kosher birds, there's no limit to the numbers. And we have a brisa that says something very similar. Rebbe Omer, Misha Ha'amar V'haya Ha'olam. It was clear and revealed and known by the one who spoke and the world came into being, namely Hashem, Shebehema Tameya Meruba Min HaTauros, that the non-kosher large animals were more numerous than the kosher ones. And so that's why the Torah teaches us the principles of the kosher animals, because they're very few, and that's much easier to teach us. And it was similarly revealed before Hashem that the kosher birds are more numerous than the non-kosher ones. And so that's why the Torah tells us the list of the non-kosher birds. So my Kamashmalan, what good is Rebbe's teaching? Meaning, fine, we all know that this is true, but is there something that we can learn from it? Or is Rebbe just being descriptive? No, he's actually teaching us a lesson. Kid Rav Huna, Amar Rab. It's a lesson that Rav Huna said in the name of Rab. V'amri la Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rab Mishum Rebbe Meir, and some trace it back to Rabbi Meir. La'olam yishna adam l'talmido derech etzara. You should always teach your student in a concise manner. And so as a result, don't use extra words when you don't need to. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Ov tahor nechal b'masoris. All right, so how are we supposed to figure out that what birds we're supposed to eat, especially if we're not an expert. So the Gemara notes what one does if one lacks this expertise. Rabbi Yitzchak says that when it comes to kosher birds, you can eat them based on a tradition. And Rashi tells us, B'Mesoras, this is Rashi 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 lines up in the Rashi, B'Mesoras, Im Zachor Ba'adam Kasher Sha'achlo. So Rashi is going to give us three possibilities. Possibility number one is if he remembers that a person who is trustworthy ate it, well, then that would be a Mesorah that you could then also eat this bird. Oh, Shemasar Lo Rabo, or his teacher told him that this particular bird was kosher. Otzied Chacham, or a wise hunter, Shehu Toar, told him that this was a kosher bird. So in all three of those cases, that's what we're talking about. So Ne'eman Hatzayed, a hunter, is believed, Lomar, Ovzet Tahor Masar Li Rebbe, that my teacher taught me that this is a kosher bird. Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'hu shebaki v'hen u'shmosehen. And that is where the teacher who taught the hunter that this is a kosher bird is an expert in the birds and in their names. So Bo Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Zera asked the following: Rabbo, when we said that when Rabbi Yitzchak said that a hunter could say that this was something that was transmitted by my teacher, what kind of teacher are we talking about? Rabbo Chacham? Is it his Rebbe that was a Chacham, meaning is his Rebbe in Torah, or Rebbe Tzayad, or his Rebbe in hunting? So let's take a look. Tashma, what is it talking about? To Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'hu shebaki v'henu b'shmosehen. Well, Rabbi Yochanan told us that the teacher needs to be an expert both in identifying the birds and in their names. Now, Amra Bishlama Rabot Tzayad Shapir. If you say that the teacher was a hunter, well, then everything works because the hunter expert could understand that the hunter expert would know both the species and the names. But if you're telling me that this is just somebody who learns a lot of Torah and knows a lot of Torah, so Bishlam Shmayahu Gamirlahu, I understand how he would know the names because that would be a tradition that would have been taught to him, and so he would learn them. Inhu miyadalahu, but they themselves, the appearance of all of these birds, is he going to know that? So it must be that the hunter's teacher was also a hunter. Shmamina. That is in fact how we conclude. And with that, we will look forward to continuing our learning together, because the Gemara is about to turn to buying eggs and how we can buy eggs. After all, how don't we need to know that the bird that laid those eggs is a kosher bird? Well, for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.